Pressure Jim Beam announcing it is halting production at its main Kentucky distillery.
Bourbon has an image problem. It's marketed as smooth, refined, and crafted with tradition. But here's the uncomfortable truth most people never hear. Not all bourbon is created equal, and some of the most popular bottles on store shelves are hiding things you'd never expect in a premium spirit. From aggressive artificial flavoring and caramel coloring to rushed aging processes and questionable sourcing, many bourbon brands prioritize profit over purity. Some are mass-produced using industrial shortcuts that strip away quality, while others rely on heavy marketing to distract from what's actually inside the bottle. And the worst part? Most consumers assume that if it's bourbon, it must be safe, clean, and well-made, which is simply not true. In recent years, certain bourbon brands have faced criticism for misleading labels, lack of transparency about ingredients, and production methods that would shock traditional bourbon drinkers. Others have been called out by whiskey experts for inconsistent batches, harsh chemical aftertastes, or artificial smoothness created in a lab rather than a barrel. Yet these bottles continue to dominate shelves because they're familiar, affordable, and heavily advertised. This matters more than people realize. What you drink doesn't just affect your taste buds, it affects your liver, your gut, and how your body processes toxins. When a bourbon is overloaded with additives or poorly distilled, the effects can show up as stronger hangovers, headaches, inflammation, and long-term strain on your system. But here's the good news. There are still bourbons worth drinking. A small number of brands stick to traditional methods, use clean ingredients, and age their whiskey properly, without relying on artificial tricks. These are the bottles that respect the craft and your health. In this video, we're exposing the bourbon brands you should never drink, no matter how popular they are, and then we'll show you 2 safer options that are actually worth your money and your time. 1. Jack Daniel's Whiskey. Jack Daniel's is one of the most recognized whiskey brands in the world, with its iconic square bottle, black label, and Tennessee branding that has become a staple in bars and homes everywhere. On the surface, it's marketed as smooth, classic, and reliable, but behind the familiar label lies a product that's far from ideal for those seeking quality or health-conscious choices. While it's distilled from a mash of corn, rye, and barley, and undergoes the traditional Lincoln County charcoal mellowing process, the massive scale of its production prioritizes consistency and volume over craftsmanship. Millions of bottles are produced every year, and to maintain the same flavor profile across batches, additives and caramel coloring are used, creating a smooth appearance and taste, but introducing compounds that are unnecessary and potentially harmful. Beyond additives, Jack Daniel's contains trace sugars from both the barrel aging process and the caramel coloring, which add to its caloric content and contribute to systemic inflammation and weight gain over time. Regular consumption of mass-produced whiskey like this can increase liver stress, dehydration, and general fatigue, while the high levels of congeners and other impurities, typical in large-scale production, often result in harsher hangovers and negative effects on overall well-being. The brand's global popularity has been fueled by clever marketing that cultivates a rugged, classic image. But it's important to understand that popularity does not equal quality or safety. Jack Daniel's is designed for mass appeal, ensuring a predictable taste rather than a pure artisanal experience, and it lacks the careful attention to detail found in small-batch, high-quality whiskeys. While it may be iconic and familiar, Jack Daniel's is a whiskey that should be approached with caution, and for those looking for a cleaner and more refined whiskey experience, there are far better options to explore, which we will cover in the Safe Brands section later. Jim Beam White Label. Jim Beam White Label is one of the most recognizable names in bourbon, but popularity does not equal quality. While the brand leans heavily on its long history, the reality is that this specific bottle represents mass production at the expense of refinement. It's designed to be affordable, consistent, and widely available, which usually means corners are cut. The first issue is aging. Jim Beam White Label is aged for a relatively short period compared to higher quality bourbons. This limited aging doesn't allow the spirit to fully mellow, resulting in a sharper, more ethanol-forward taste. To compensate, the bourbon relies heavily on char and sweetness rather than complexity. The flavor profile often comes across as thin, with a noticeable burn that lingers without much character behind it. Another concern is batch scale. Producing bourbon at the volume Jim Beam does requires extreme consistency, which often means blending large batches and prioritizing uniformity over nuance. While this ensures the bottle tastes the same every time, it also strips away individuality. The end product lacks the layered notes that define carefully crafted bourbon. From a health and tolerance perspective, many drinkers report stronger hangovers with lower-tier mass-market bourbons like this one. While still technically straight bourbon, the combination of young age, aggressive filtration, and industrial-scale production can make it harder on the body compared to better-aged, smaller-batch options. Jim Beam White Label isn't undrinkable, but it's a prime example of how a famous name can hide mediocrity. It's built for mixers and volume sales, not for people who actually care about what they're drinking. If you're serious about bourbon, this is one of those bottles that's better left on the shelf. Evan Williams Black Label. Evan Williams Black Label is often praised for being budget-friendly, but that affordability comes with trade-offs that serious bourbon drinkers should pay attention to. While it carries the title of Kentucky Straight Bourbon, this bottle is produced at an enormous scale, and that level of mass production inevitably affects quality and overall drinkability. One of the biggest issues with Evan Williams Black Label is its relatively young age. Although the exact aging can vary by batch, the bourbon is typically aged for a shorter period than higher quality competitors. This limited barrel time means the spirit doesn't fully develop the rounded, complex flavors that come from extended interaction with oak. The taste often leans heavily toward raw ethanol, sharp oak bitterness, and a slightly sour finish. To maintain consistency across millions of bottles, the brand relies on large-scale blending. While this keeps the flavor predictable, it also removes individuality and nuance. The bourbon lacks layered notes and instead delivers a flat profile dominated by sweetness up front and heat on the back end. Many drinkers describe it as thin or harsh, especially when consumed neat. Another concern is how aggressively the bourbon is filtered. Heavy filtration can strip away impurities, but it can also remove desirable compounds that contribute to mouthfeel and aroma. The result is a cleaner-looking whiskey that sacrifices character. This is part of why Evan Williams Black Label is often recommended only as a mixer rather than a sipping bourbon. From a tolerance standpoint, lower-tier mass-market bourbons like this one are frequently associated with stronger hangovers. The combination of younger spirit, sharp alcohol bite, and minimal complexity can make it harder on the body, particularly when consumed in larger amounts. Evan Williams Black Label isn't marketed as premium, but its widespread acceptance can be misleading. It's a bourbon built for price and volume, not for quality or craftsmanship. If you're looking for a bourbon worth savoring, this is one that's better avoided. 4. Old Crow Bourbon. Old Crow is one of the oldest names in American whiskey, but its modern version bears little resemblance to the bourbon that originally built its reputation. Today, Old Crow is widely regarded as a bottom-shelf bourbon, and for good reason. Its production focuses almost entirely on cost efficiency rather than flavor development or refinement. The most noticeable problem with Old Crow is its extremely light body and aggressive alcohol presence. The bourbon is typically aged for the bare minimum required to be labeled straight bourbon, which doesn't allow enough time for the spirit to mellow. As a result, the flavor profile is dominated by harsh grain notes, sharp ethanol burn, and an absence of balance. Old Crow also suffers from a lack of transparency and attention to detail. The mash bill and aging process are not points of pride for the brand, and that shows in the final product. There's very little complexity, no evolving notes, no depth, and no finish that lingers in a pleasant way. What you taste up front is essentially what you get, and it fades quickly into bitterness. Because it's produced at scale and designed for the lowest possible price point, Old Crow relies on blending and filtration techniques that prioritize drinkability over character. This creates a whiskey that's easy to mix but unpleasant to sip. Even when used in cocktails, its rough edges are hard to mask. From a health and tolerance perspective, Old Crow is often cited as a culprit behind intense hangovers. The sharp alcohol profile and lack of refinement can stress the body more than better-aged, cleaner distilled bourbons. Old Crow survives on nostalgia and low cost, not quality. While its name carries historical weight, the modern product is a clear example of how far a brand can drift from its roots. For anyone who values what bourbon is supposed to be, this is one to avoid. 5. Ancient Age Bourbon. Ancient Age Bourbon is often overlooked, but that doesn't make it harmless. While it carries a familiar Kentucky heritage label, the reality is that this bourbon is produced with affordability and speed in mind, not quality or balance. It's positioned as an entry-level option, and the drinking experience reflects that clearly. One of the biggest drawbacks of Ancient Age is its minimal aging. The bourbon spends just enough time in barrels to legally qualify, but not long enough to develop depth or smoothness. As a result, the flavor is thin and one-dimensional, with strong grain notes and a sharp alcohol edge that dominates the palate. There's little oak influence to round things out, which is one of the defining qualities of well-made bourbon. Consistency is another issue. Because Ancient Age is produced in large volumes, blending is used to maintain a uniform profile across batches. While this ensures predictability, it removes character. The bourbon lacks the layered aromas and evolving taste that come from smaller batch production. What you taste at first sip is essentially all it has to offer. From a drinkability standpoint, Ancient Age is harsh when consumed neat. Many people rely on mixers to make it tolerable, which is often a sign that the base spirit itself isn't well refined. Even in cocktails, its rough alcohol bite can overpower other ingredients instead of complementing them. In terms of tolerance, bourbons like Ancient Age are frequently associated with quicker intoxication and heavier hangovers. Younger spirits with sharper ethanol profiles can be harder on the body, especially when consumed in larger quantities. The lack of refinement means your system has to work harder to process it. Ancient Age survives because it's inexpensive and widely available. available, not because it's good. It represents the type of bourbon that meets minimum standards without aspiring to anything more. For anyone who actually cares about what they're drinking, this is a bottle best avoided. 6. Old Fitzgerald Prime. Old Fitzgerald Prime is a confusing product because it trades on a historic name that once represented quality bourbon. Unfortunately, the modern Prime version does not live up to that legacy. Instead, it's a diluted, entry-level expression designed to capitalize on brand recognition rather than craftsmanship. One of the most immediate red flags is its lower proof. While lower proof can sometimes make a bourbon smoother, in this case, it exposes the lack of flavor underneath. The reduced alcohol content leaves the bourbon tasting watery and hollow, with very little structure or complexity to support it. Aging is another weak point. Old Fitzgerald Prime is aged just long enough to qualify as bourbon, but not long enough to develop meaningful oak character. The result is a spirit that feels unfinished. Instead of rich vanilla, caramel, or spice notes, you're left with faint sweetness and a short, inspiring finish. Production scale also plays a role. This bourbon is blended in large quantities to maintain consistency, which often means sacrificing individuality. Heavy filtration further strips away texture and aroma, leaving a cleaner-looking whiskey that lacks personality. It may go down easily, but it doesn't leave any impression worth remembering. From a health and tolerance perspective, lower quality bourbons like this can still cause disproportionate effects. The lack of balance and refinement can contribute to fatigue, headaches, and general discomfort after drinking, especially if consumed quickly due to its mild taste. Old Fitzgerald Prime relies heavily on its historic name to justify its presence on shelves. When judged purely on what's inside the bottle, it falls short. It's a bourbon that exists to fill a price gap, not to honor tradition or deliver quality. 7. Kentucky Gentleman Bourbon. Kentucky Gentleman is often mistaken for a traditional bourbon simply because of its name and branding, but it's one of the most misleading bottles on the shelf. Despite sounding classic and refined, Kentucky Gentleman is actually a blended whiskey, not a straight bourbon, and that distinction matters more than most people realize. One of the biggest concerns with Kentucky Gentleman is how it's produced. Instead of relying solely on properly aged bourbon, it blends a small portion of straight bourbon with large amounts of neutral grain spirits. These neutral spirits are distilled to a very high proof, stripping away most flavor and character before being diluted and mixed back in. The result is a whiskey that technically meets labeling requirements but lacks authenticity and depth. Flavor-wise, Kentucky Gentleman is thin, harsh, and inconsistent. There's very little barrel influence, which is a key marker of real bourbon quality. Instead of rich vanilla, caramel, or spice notes, you get a sharp alcohol bite and faint sweetness that disappears almost immediately. This is why it's rarely sipped neat and is instead marketed as a budget mixer. Another issue is transparency. Many casual drinkers don't realize they're consuming a blended product with neutral spirits, because the branding leans heavily on Kentucky bourbon imagery. This creates a false perception of quality and tradition that the liquid inside simply doesn't support. From a tolerance standpoint, blended whiskeys like Kentucky Gentleman are often harder on the body. Neutral grain spirits can contribute to quicker intoxication and more severe hangover symptoms compared to well-aged, single-style bourbons. The lack of balance and refinement makes it easier to overconsume without realizing it. Kentucky Gentleman exists to be cheap, not good. It's designed for volume sales and minimal production costs, not craftsmanship. For anyone who cares about what bourbon is supposed to represent, this is a bottle that should be avoided entirely. 8. Early Times Kentucky Whiskey. Early Times is another brand that benefits from long-standing name recognition, but its current formulation raises several red flags. While it was once sold as a straight bourbon, the standard version available today is labeled as Kentucky Whiskey, which signals an important downgrade in production standards. The biggest issue with Early Times is barrel usage. Unlike traditional bourbon, which must be aged in new charred oak barrels, Kentucky whiskey can be aged in used barrels. This dramatically reduces flavor extraction and complexity. As a result, Early Times lacks the richness and structure that define quality bourbon. On the palate, the whiskey comes across as flat and underdeveloped. There's a mild sweetness up front, but it's quickly overtaken by raw grain notes and a drying alcohol finish. The absence of strong oak influence makes the whiskey feel incomplete, almost unfinished, as if it was rushed to market. Production at this level focuses on efficiency and consistency, not excellence. Large-scale blending and filtration are used to smooth out flaws, but they also remove character. What's left is a neutral, forgettable whiskey that relies more on nostalgia than quality. From a health and tolerance perspective, lower-tier whiskeys like Early Times are often associated with heavier hangovers. The combination of younger spirit, used barrels, and aggressive processing can make it harder for the body to metabolize cleanly, especially when consumed in larger amounts. Early Times survives because it's familiar and affordable, not because it delivers a good drinking experience. While the name carries historical weight, modern product falls far short of what bourbon drinkers should expect. It's a clear example of how labeling loopholes can mask declining quality. We've covered the bourbons that cut corners and sacrifice quality for mass production. Now it's time to flip the script and talk about the few brands that actually respect the craft. These are the bourbons that are worth drinking, made the right way, without shortcuts. Safe bourbon. Number 1. Woodford Reserve. When it comes to bourbon that respects tradition and quality, Woodford Reserve consistently stands out. Unlike many mass-produced brands that prioritize speed and cost over craftsmanship, Woodford Reserve follows meticulous distilling and aging practices that ensure a balanced, flavorful whiskey every time. This bourbon is produced in small batches at the historic Woodford Reserve Distillery in Kentucky, where attention to detail is prioritized at every stage of production. The process starts with a carefully selected mash bill, blending corn, rye, and malted barley in precise proportions. This mix contributes to Woodford Reserve's signature flavor profile, a combination of sweet corn, spicy rye, and rich malt notes that dance across the palate. Every batch is distilled slowly in copper pot stills, a traditional method that retains complexity while avoiding harsh alcohol flavors. The bourbon is then aged in new, charred oak barrels, allowing it to develop deep caramel, vanilla, and toasted wood notes over time. This aging process is essential. The barrels infuse the bourbon with flavors that mass-produced alternatives simply can't replicate. One of the key reasons Woodford Reserve is a healthy choice among bourbons is the transparency of its production. Every step, from the grain selection to the bottling, is documented and controlled. There are no shortcuts, no blending with neutral spirits, and no over-processing. This means you're getting a true bourbon experience, with all the flavors and benefits that come from traditional distillation and aging. From a taste perspective, Woodford Reserve is incredibly versatile. It's smooth enough to sip neat, but it also holds up well in cocktails, offering a depth of flavor that transforms classics like the Old Fashioned or Manhattan. The natural sweetness and balanced spice make it a favorite among both seasoned bourbon enthusiasts and newcomers. Health-wise, while bourbon should always be consumed responsibly, Woodford Reserve's clean production means fewer impurities and congeners than cheaper, lower-quality alternatives. Impurities in low-quality whiskeys often contribute to harsher hangovers, but Woodford's careful distillation and aging reduce this risk, making it a more refined and enjoyable choice. In short, Woodford Reserve embodies everything bourbon should be: traditional, flavorful, and carefully crafted. It's proof that high-quality bourbon can be both delicious and responsibly made, offering a genuine experience that avoids the pitfalls of mass-market processed options. For anyone serious about their bourbon, this is a brand you can trust, a benchmark for quality, flavor, and integrity in every sip. Safe bourbon number 2. Buffalo Trace. Buffalo Trace bourbon is another standout in the world of premium bourbons, renowned for its exceptional craftsmanship and long-standing heritage. Produced at the historic Buffalo Trace Distillery in Frankfort, Kentucky, this bourbon has earned its reputation through consistent quality, traditional methods, and a focus on flavor that sets it apart from mass-produced alternatives. While many bourbons on the shelf cut corners to save time or cost, Buffalo Trace sticks to small-batch, meticulous production processes that ensure each bottle delivers a rich, authentic bourbon experience. The distillation begins with a carefully balanced mash bill, typically featuring a dominant corn content with carefully measured amounts of rye and malted barley. This combination creates a smooth, slightly sweet foundation, with a touch of spice that defines Buffalo Trace's unique flavor profile. Distillation occurs slowly in copper pot stills and column stills, allowing the distillers to capture a refined spirit that avoids harshness while retaining depth and complexity. Once distilled, the bourbon is transferred to new, charred oak barrels, where it undergoes a patient aging process. Barrels impart rich notes of vanilla, caramel, and toasty oak, giving the bourbon its signature warm, layered taste. One of the aspects that makes Buffalo Trace a safe and reliable choice is its adherence to transparency and tradition. The distillery openly shares details about its production methods, sourcing of grains, and barrel aging practices. Unlike cheaper, lower-quality bourbons that may include added flavorings or shortcuts, Buffalo Trace is purely crafted from natural ingredients and allowed to mature at its own pace. This attention to detail translates to a smoother, cleaner drinking experience and a product that is free from unnecessary additives or industrial shortcuts. Flavor-wise, Buffalo Trace offers a versatile profile that works beautifully both neat and in cocktails. When sipped straight, it presents a complex mix of sweet vanilla, caramel, and a subtle hint of spice. In classic bourbon cocktails such as the Old Fashioned, Manhattan, or Mint Julep, it enhances the drink without overpowering it, providing a depth of flavor that many mass-market bourbons lack. Its consistency consistency also makes it a trusted choice for enthusiasts who want a dependable, high-quality spirit every time. From a health and enjoyment standpoint, consuming a bourbon like Buffalo Trace responsibly ensures fewer congeners and impurities than lower-end, mass-produced options. These impurities are often the cause of harsher hangovers and digestive discomfort, so choosing a clean, carefully crafted bourbon can make a noticeable difference in the overall experience. In essence, Buffalo Trace is a bourbon that respects tradition, craftsmanship, and quality. Its smoothness, complexity, and natural flavors make it a safe choice for anyone looking to enjoy bourbon without compromise. Whether you're a casual drinker or a dedicated aficionado, this bourbon delivers a premium experience that proves excellence doesn't require shortcuts, just skill, patience, and attention to detail. And there you have it, the bourbon brands to avoid and the two safe options that truly stand out: Woodford Reserve and Buffalo Trace. Choosing the right bourbon is about more than taste. It's about quality, craftsmanship, and enjoying a smooth, clean sip without unnecessary additives or shortcuts. By avoiding mass-produced brands and going for carefully crafted options, you not only elevate your drinking experience, but also protect your health and palate from inferior spirits. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel so you never miss guides like this. Turn on the notifications to stay updated every time we share tips, reviews, and insider insights on food, drinks, and products you use every day.